Previously on the Dark Side of Love, following a bitter divorce and acrimonious custody battle over their two sons, Dan Markel and Wendi Adelson seem to call a truce, until Dan is gunned down in his garage one July morning in 2014 and later dies. Suspicion immediately turns to ex-wife Wendi. However, the brutal truth about Dan's murder hits closer to home than anyone suspects. Hello and welcome to the Dark Side of Love. I'm your host, Bianca Sloan, author of suspense novels about the dark side of love. And this week I'm putting a spotlight on part 2 of the case I'm calling All in the Family. It's summer of 2014, and in the sad and chaotic days following Dan Markel's horrific murder, police are questioning any and everyone connected to the popular Florida state law professor's murder, including the new boyfriend of Dan's ex-wife, Wendi Adelson. Jeff LaCase admits to police that he despised Dan because of how he thinks Dan treated Wendi, but certainly not enough to kill him. Jeff says while he may not have hated Dan enough to kill him, Wendi's family, the Adelsons, certainly did. South Florida native Wendi was desperate to leave Tallahassee, where she and Dan had been living, so she could move back to Miami to be near her family. However, her custody agreement mandated that she had to stay put, and she and her family are furious about it. There is nothing Wendi or her family wants more than for her to be free from the clutches of Tallahassee. But she is, in a word, stuck. And toward that end, Jeff LaCase tells cops, quote, that family desperately wants her back in South Florida. They hate Danny in a way I have never seen this kind of obsession. Like their hobby is hating Danny. When Dan's friend Alex Greenberg is interviewed by police, he says about the Adelsons, quote, I think they're mean. And during one of Wendi's own interviews with police, when she calls her mom to tell her that Dan has been shot, Wendi says, quote, well, my parents sounded really surprised, so that's a relief. She goes on to say that in trying to think of who would be angry enough to do something like this to Dan, she muses that, quote, my parents would be angry, but they're not capable of this. She admits that, quote, my parents have more reason to dislike Danny than almost anyone else. He hurt their daughter. It's chilling, to be sure, the thought that Wendi's family would take their hatred of Dan to this level, but it's not enough to definitively say, hey, it's the Adelsons. Cops need more to go on. After Dan's murder, Wendi is now free to move about the country, and at long last, she heads home to Miami, living with her family for about a year before getting an apartment in Miami Beach. She's clerking for a federal judge, and she's even taking a creative writing class where she creates a podcast detailing her thoughts on Dan's murder. She also discusses her marriage and her understandably complicated feelings for her murdered ex-husband. But it comes off kind of snarky, and her tone really rubs people the wrong way. And cops, meanwhile, they continue investigating Dan's murder. As part of building a timeline of Dan's movements on the day that he died, cops pull footage from the gym where he works out that morning. And as he leaves the gym, they notice that he's being followed by a light-colored Toyota Prius. Remember that Dan's neighbor saw a light-colored Toyota Prius leaving the scene the morning that Dan was shot. So this, of course, gets cops all kinds of excited. And Dan's neighbors, they had also told police that they'd actually seen a silver Toyota Prius prowling the neighborhood the day before the murder. So cops put out a tip via local media asking anyone who might know anything about this car or who owns it to call the cops. One of the distinctive things about the car that cops noticed in the surveillance footage is that it has a sun pass, which is for toll roads. Well, there aren't any toll roads in Tallahassee, so that helps to narrow things down a little bit. And eventually, they track this car to this kind of broken down rental lot in, wait for it, Miami, where Wendi's family lives. Coincidence? I don't think so. And the rental contract reveals the names of the passengers of this silver Prius. Two men by the name of Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia. This is huge, obviously. And now that cops have these two names, they can start to track their cell phones. And that provides quite the timeline of what these two were up to that day, including that they made the 7-hour trek from Miami to Tallahassee and straight to Dan Markel's house. Cameras and cell phone records show that immediately after Dan was shot, Luis and Sigfredo turn around and come right back to Miami. Along the way, they make a stop at an ATM where surveillance cameras capture the two men withdrawing some cash. It is enough to arrest the two men for Dan's murder. And in May of 2016, almost 2 years after Dan's murder, that is exactly what happens. So there is no discernible connection between these two gang members and, turns out, near lifetime convicts, and respected law professor Dan. So the next logical jump is, well, this must be a murder for hire. Well, that's a pretty good jump. Now, we already know that Jeff LaCase, the guy that Wendi was dating after her divorce from Dan, has told police how much Wendi's family despises Dan. And again, they do live in Miami, where these two gangbangers are from. So this feels, fakakta because the Adelsons, Wendi's family, they're quite wealthy. Her father and brother own a very successful dental practice, so it is doubtful that they are having Sunday brunch with two low-level gangbangers. But police do uncover a link between Sigfredo Garcia and the Adelsons. And her name is Catherine Magbanua. A Filipino immigrant, Catherine Magbanua shares 2 kids with Sigfredo Garcia. She spends her nights as a bottle girl at some of Miami's hottest clubs and her days working in various medical offices around town. Now, who do we know in this story that has a medical office? Oh, right. The Adelsons. She is drawing some hefty paychecks from the Adelson Institute, which is the dental practice owned by Wendi's brother and her father. And her checks are signed by Donna Adelson, who is the bookkeeper for the business. But what no one can tell is what, if anything, Catherine, or Katie, as she's known, does for the Institute. There's no paperwork, no work schedule, no job title, nothing. In addition to these paychecks that she's getting, she's also gifted a Lexus that was once owned by Harvey Adelson, that's Wendi's father. And Charlie, the brother, pays for half of Katie's boob job. So this is obviously all kinds of suspicious, and cops want to know more. So they start digging. And that dig turns up that Charlie Adelson, Wendi's brother, dated Katie from 2013 to about 2015, which overlaps with Dan's murder in 2014. So at one point, the FBI tries to set up a sting operation to extract a confession from the Adelsons or Katie, whoever goes first, but neither of those things goes anywhere. There are a lot of dots floating around, but nobody can seem to connect them until Luis Rivera steps up and provides the pencil. So when Luis was arrested for his part in Dan's murder, he was already in prison on an unrelated drug charge. Prosecutors offer that instead of getting the death penalty for his role in Dan's murder, he'll serve an extra 7 years in prison on the drug charge. This is considered a sweetheart deal, and he jumps at it. So in a long and wide-ranging conversation with authorities, he reveals that he thought he was driving 7 hours to Tallahassee to rob somebody. And then it's not until he's in the car with his buddy Sigfredo that he learns that, oh, no, we're actually going up there to murder somebody. And the whole reason that Luis was along for the ride was because Sigfredo wanted some company. That's insane. Absolutely insane. Anyway, so Luis was offered 35 grand for going along for the ride, and he says Katie is basically the go-between with them and, quote, the lady who's funding this excursion. And Luis also claims that, quote, Katie is the one in the middle doing everything. Luis said that he asked his buddy why he was going to kill Dan Markel, and that Sigfredo said, quote, the lady wants her 2 kids back. She wants full custody of them kids. That's what I want to go kill that man for. Luis says that he and Sigfredo tried a few times, actually, to murder Dan. Having gone up to Tallahassee prior to the actual murder, they're following Dan, they're stalking his movements, they're just waiting for their time, so to speak. But they can't get a good look, so they retreat to Miami to come back and try another day. So another day does come about a month later when they return to Miami, follow Dan again, and this time they're successful. Sigfredo is actually the one to pull the trigger, shooting Dan twice before getting in the silver Prius and taking off. Luis says that after shooting Dan, Sigfredo calls Katie and tells her it's done. The gun used in Dan's murder is never found, but on the strength of Louise's confession and Katie drawing all of this suspicious money and gifts from the Adelsons, she is arrested for her role in Dan's murder. So Katie and Sigfredo, who have two children together, remember, they actually go on trial together. And Georgia Kappelman, the state's attorney who was trying the case, makes it clear what the motive was for murdering Dan, saying, quote, Wendi Adelson had a problem, and her problem was Dan Markel. Katie testifies on her own behalf, which, word to the wise, if you're guilty, don't do that. She claims that she was Charlie's assistant doing odd jobs for him, hence the paychecks that she was getting from the dental practice. And it also comes out that Wendi and Katie were actually pretty friendly with each other during the time that Katie was dating Charlie. So I can imagine what those two were talking about over margaritas. But at any rate, let's pause here a moment and zoom in on Charlie Adelson. Charlie Adelson, described by Dateline as a Ferrari-owning periodontist, is the ultimate bachelor, who Matthew Sher tells Dateline, quote, lives the life of a single successful guy. The license plate on that Ferrari even says Maestro. In describing her brother to police, Wendi says Charlie, quote, makes a lot of jokes in bad taste. And one joke that he made that nobody can seem to forget, because why should they, was something Charlie said after Wendi's divorce. Apparently, he bought her a TV as a divorce present and said, quote, oh, I looked into hiring a hitman and it was cheaper to get you this TV. So when Wendi tells cops about this, she's adamant that her brother wouldn't have murdered Dan, that he just isn't capable of something so horrific. But like, who jokes about hiring a hitman? Except Jeff LaCase, the by now ex-boyfriend, Wendi's ex-boyfriend. He didn't see the statement as some ha-ha funny when Wendi related the story to him, because he tells police, quote, she told me that Charlie had looked into having Danny killed in the summer of 2013. She meant it, dead serious. And if Wendi doesn't think that her brother is capable of this, Jeff sure does, because he tells cops point blank, quote, I would be investigating Charlie Adelson. I don't know who did this, but if you're looking at somebody, don't miss him. And at the end of Sigfredo and Katie's trial, Sigfredo is found guilty, while a mistrial is declared for Katie. So now we know there's going to be another trial, and authorities become ever more determined to find the smoking gun, as it were, to nail Charlie. They tap his phone, they're following him, they are putting the squeeze on him wherever they can. And it's not until they send one of the surveillance tapes they have of Charlie and Katie at a local cafe talking about the case in, kind of coded terms, but still, they're talking about it. They send that tape to an audio expert to enhance the conversation. Do authorities finally feel that they have enough to arrest Charlie? And that tape also proves vital to securing a conviction for Katie for her second trial, as she is found guilty of first-degree murder, receiving a life sentence. And so now that Katie is not trying to save her neck, she is finally ready to mention it all at Charlie's trial and spill the tea about just how Dan's murder came down. She testifies that Charlie is the mastermind behind the entire plot, saying it started when he asked her point blank, quote, do you know anyone who can harm someone? Well, of course she did. Sigfredo, he's a gangbanger. He's in and out of jail. Now, she doesn't tell Sigfredo that this murder is for Charlie because there's some jealousy there, because she had dated Charlie for, pretty good length of time, and she's got the two kids with Sigfredo, and gosh, this is messy. Anyway, after the murder has been carried out, Katie paid Sigfredo $100,000 in cash that she got from Charlie. And get this, the bills were stapled together, which is something that Charlie was known to do. Pretty specific. Not a lot of people do that. So that leads a trail right back to Charlie Adelson. And so no surprise, she also admits that the checks from the dental practice were payment for her part in this plot. Okay, so now we're up at Charlie's trial, as I said. And he testifies, and again, if you're guilty, don't testify on your own behalf. So, of course, Charlie says that everything Katie said was an absolute lie. So here is the insane story that Charlie says is what actually happened. Okay. He claims that on the night of Dan's murder, a distraught Katie shows up at his house and says, oh, my bad. I've been running my big fat mouth to my criminal boyfriend about your family, and I mentioned that your parents were prepared to pay Dan $1 million to go away. And long story longer, my criminal boyfriend just killed Dan, and he now wants a third of that $1 million. And if you don't pay within 48 hours, they'll kill you, the family, everybody. Charlie actually said all of this on the stand with a straight face. Oh, but wait, it gets better because, of course, it always gets better. Charlie says to her, he testifies that he says to Katie, you know what? I will give you $138,000 now. And how about we set up a payment plan for the rest? Let's say 3 grand a month because murderers take payment plans, apparently. This, Charlie says, is when they set up the payments to Katie through the dental practice, claiming he told his mom, Donna, who is the bookkeeper for the business, that Katie was just doing some odd jobs for him. And despite all of this urgency of you have to have this money within 48 hours or you're going to kill everybody, instead of taking the money and running right over to, give it to the killers, Katie spends the night, which tells me they had other things that they were doing, thinking about that night. But anyway, we have to go back to Wendy because where is she in all of this? Stephen B. Epstein, the author of Extreme Punishment, which is a book about the case, he tells Dateline, quote, "It's impossible to believe that Wendy has known all these years nothing about what happened." Agreed. Turns out the day of the murder, Wendy drove by Dan's house, which she had no reason to do, so we can surmise that maybe she was verifying that Dan was dead. She changed the kids' last names from Markel to Adelson, claiming that it was for their safety, but we're all smart enough to know this was just another way to wipe Dan's presence away from the kids' lives. Wendy is, in fact, named a co conspirator in her brother's case, I believe, but she's not charged. She isn't indicted. And so while Katie fingered Charlie as the mastermind behind Dan's murder, prosecutors say the real brains behind the curtain is matriarch Donna. Prosecutors say Charlie was, quote, equal parts black sheep and mama's boy. He would often try to help Wendy at Donna's bidding, going on to describe the pecking order in the Adelson family as Wendy being the weakling, Donna the overbearing mother, Charlie is the savior. Well, Charlie can't save himself because it only takes jurors 3 hours to find the black sheep guilty of first-degree murder, and he is sentenced to life in prison. Oh, but wait, there's more. You knew that, right? Nothing, of course, has gone according to plan, and Donna is just beside herself. She and Charlie talk on the phone frequently when he's sentenced to prison, and he's stunned. Like their phone calls are being recorded, and you can hear he is stunned. She's sobbing, and she's just undone by this whole thing. After Charlie's conviction, Wendy, the so-called weakling, she doesn't seem like she's all that undone because it appears that she retreats from the pack, which infuriates Donna, who sends her only daughter an angry text, quote, "Everyone looks to protect you." Wendy does not respond right away, though she does eventually send back a platitude about Charlie being responsible for his own life and that she didn't have anything to do with any of this. Another matter pressing against Donna, why she wants Wendy to come back to the fold, is that she wants to make sure her daughter has access to the family safe and assorted other business because Donna does not plan to be around. You see, Donna has been searching for countries with no extradition treaties with the United States, and she lands on Vietnam 1 week after her son is convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Wendy's parents book one-way tickets to Vietnam. Now, they don't know that the FBI is still watching them, and the FBI waits until Harvey and Donna are literally about to step onto the plane before they swoop in and slap the cuffs on Donna. Now, Harvey is not arrested, but Donna is, charged with first-degree murder, solicitation of murder, and conspiracy. As of April 2024, Donna Adelson's trial is set to begin on September 30th, 2024. To date, Wendy has not been charged with anything. But as her former mother-in-law Ruth told Dateline about whether or not Wendy should be worried, she said, quote, "I think everybody should be worried." Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of The Dark Side of Love. I'm your host, Bianca Sloan, and show your love for The Dark Side of Love by visiting thedarksideoflove.com for show notes and transcripts. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter to be notified about new episodes, and you can also find a link to my Patreon page where you can access bonus material and other fun stuff. Learn more about my suspense novels about the dark side of love by visiting biancasloan.com. Thanks for hanging out with me, and join me next time for another tale of love gone wrong. I'll see you on the dark side.